Right, good morning everyone. Yeah, thanks for joining for this talk. As Oscar said, this talk is about sort of like how to organize as a business, and I'll sort of like explain a little bit sort of like why I sort of like volunteered to do this talk. And before that, it's probably good to sort of like understand sort of like who I am. I'm Pieter. I'm one of the partners at Triple Dragon. And we are a London-based games, finance and investment firm. So we're specialized in financing and investing in games. So we see lots and lots and lots of developers, and we want to invest and finance game developers. And unfortunately, we see a lot of pitches and projects that are not really sort of investable, and we'd like to sort of see that improve, see more projects where we can actually say, well, yes, we love it and it looks good, let's go ahead with this. So that's why I thought, well, it would be good to have a talk about how to organize yourself as a business. It's all very good that you can sort of like make a beautiful game, but you want to get it published. If you need to have funding in place to sort of like get the project completed, it's part of your job and part of your profession to be able to deal with publishers and investors, and hopefully you'll be able to take away a few points during this talk on how to sort of like improve that, or at the very least understand what publishers and investors are looking for. And more specifically, why am I talking about this here? I was at an event 4 months ago here in Amman, literally across the same sort of like venue across the street, Digital Masrek Forum. And it was my first visit to Jordan, and first sort of like proper visit to the MENA region. And we saw lots and lots of technology businesses, a few games companies, but all looking very promising and sort of like talented entrepreneurs. So I was getting really excited about it, but unfortunately, we didn't invest in any of them. And that sort of brings us to the reason why. Because if you sort of like look at the opportunity, there was a lot that we really, really liked, and that we really liked about the region. So for example, there's lots of favorable conditions for game developers here in Jordan and the wider MENA region. I mean, you're operating in a very large and, relatively speaking, sort of like homogeneous market, and mobile and web is growing really, really fast. Demographics are really favorable. Lots of sort of like young populations and growing populations. And what we love most, sort of like a diverse pool of very talented people. And we also see sort of like lots of things on the business side improving. We start to see sort of like the first US VC firms coming in, investing in technology businesses here in the region, which is a really good sign. And quite a lot of support from government and the World Bank. So there was a lot that we liked. And that brings us a little bit sort of like, what was our problem? What was preventing us from investing in companies here in the region? And it sort of broke down on sort of like two aspects, really. The first one is what we call sort of like business and organization, so I'd like to talk a little bit about that this morning. And the other one was data, and mostly sort of like analytics and unit economics. Those concepts can be much improved on. But starting at like business and organization, a few things that we sort of like saw with the startups that we met, and had some similar experiences sort of meeting companies here, and it's not intended as criticism. I'm trying to help on how to improve that. Investors expect to see a company which is like properly organized as a legal entity. If you're starting out as an indie, you're probably not organized yet as a company, but if you get serious and you start to raise some investment, those are the things that you need to do. So have a good sort of like company structure in place before you sort of like go pitching to investors. And when you start to pitch to investors, try to sort of like put some, put a lot of thought in what you're going to sort of like put into your pitch documents. And there have been talks on like how to pitch to investors here at this conference. If you haven't attended them, try to get the slides. But what we saw was pitches were sometimes vague, mostly on, well, how much funding do you need? Well, if you don't know, that's not really a good sign if you're pitching to an investor. And how are you going to use the money? Another thing that we sort of like noticed in a lot of pitches was financial planning and budgeting was quite often a bit lacking. I get it, if you're not experienced with that, that can be sort of like a fairly difficult topic, but it's what investors want to see. You need to get organized, be disciplined, try to sort of like get your head around how much money I'm going to need. Not just next year, I mean, break it down month by month. And the other thing, and this was really, for us, the one that sort of like stood out most was, and this is especially for people in the games industry, because at the last event, there was sort of like a wider subset of like technology startups, but analytics and unit economics are so important if you're a game developer, and that is really the one thing that we sort of like missing most when we sort of meeting companies here in the region. If you don't have historic data available, how are you going to sort of like explain to an investor how much installs did you do? How much revenue did you do? What were your total costs last year? I mean, very, very basic historic information that you can easily have available. Make sure you have it available when you speak to investors. And the other thing, sort of like analytics, we'll talk a little bit more about that. One of the other talks that was given here yesterday by Alexis, he was very, very clear. I mean, yes, games industry is a creative industry, but it's a data-driven business. So you need to get a firm grip on analytics. Try to spend time on understanding how analytic packages work, how to use them, what kind of information you can get out of that, and what information is useful. We'll talk more about that. The other thing that I found sort of like a bit surprising when sort of like meeting companies is if you're pitching a really sort of like cool game idea, chances are there are games that are somewhat similar that have been published. So try to get that information and try to sort of like make sure that that sort of like market research around sort of like comparable games, that you have that available ideally in your pitch deck. If you're pitching for project financing and you're doing, say, a zombie horror game, well, I would like to know what 3 or 5 other sort of like zombie horror games with roughly the same budget, don't compare to a AAA game, have been sort of like published. How well or how not so well did they do? Because that's information I would like to see. Is this an investment proposition in something that is a relatively small niche game, or is this something that could do really, really well? So have that information available. The other thing that I found sort of like a bit surprising is unit economics. Because games is really sort of like data-driven, I would expect game developers to have a very, very sort of like clear grip on, all right, if you're making a mobile game, what is lifetime value? What is your day 30 lifetime value? What is your day 90 lifetime value? Because if you don't know that, and if, same thing, how much does it cost to sort of like acquire a user? What is your cost per install? If you don't know those numbers, like per user, per install, you'll not be able to tell whether your game is going to be profitable, whether it's scalable, and those are very, very important aspects for investors. So what can you do to sort of like improve on that? Because that's why we're here. We'd like to see more companies that are actually investable for us. So company structure. When you start a fundraising process, think about this, prepare this. If you need to sort of like tidy up or set up a company, do it in advance. Make sure you have a sort of like a clean and simple to understand ownership structure. And make sure it's sort of like
properly capitalized. So if everyone is investing, make sure they have shares and not sort of like one has shares, one has loans, and it becomes messy. And make sure that all assets are in the company, that there's not sort of, oh yes, we also had this game, but that was partially financed by someone else and it's actually not in the company. I mean, that really gets complicated, confusing. Investors don't like that. And have shareholders agreements in place. It's something investors will want to see, because we don't want arguments between founders or founders and earlier angel investors. Investors don't like it. It's also not good for you. If we invest in a company, we want you to focus on making games, not sort of like haggling about legal agreements with angel investors or other sort of like shareholders. So try to do that in advance. The other thing about pitching, again, it's a little bit about organizing. Prepare it, practice, do a dummy run. It's not too difficult, and make sure you go to a pitch prepared. I mean, once you're sort of like more organized as a business, and you have your financial information available, have it at hand. Worst case scenario, have it at a laptop so you can pull it up during a pitch meeting if necessary. Make sure that you thought about very, very clearly about the funding amount that you're after and how you're going to use the money. And include in your pitch when you're presenting it that you've actually thought about, well, these are sort of like the nearest games in the market. They did really, really well. They sold this many copies, made this much revenue, because it shows that you understand sort of like what your competitors are in terms of games or studios. It shows that you've done your market research and you become a lot more credible as a business to receive investment. The other thing is, we're in the games industry. We talk about UI, UX all the time. Now, try to do that when you pitch to an investor. Try to make it easy for investors to understand what the proposition is. So, if you are from a company, from a country with a currency other than a dollar, don't make me think about how to convert that into dollars. I'd like to sort of like instantly sort of like understand, oh yes, that's $250,000. In a game, you would be doing exactly the same. You're making everything as frictionless as possible. Do that when you're sort of pitching and presenting. So avoid local currency if you can. Make everyone in the investment community sort of like counting and analyzing in dollars. Present it in that. And also have information available sort of like in different, call it formats. If you're looking at revenue, an investor might actually want to know the installs or the other way around. So have both sets of data available when you're meeting with investors. The other point, financial planning, again, it's about preparing and organizing. If you are budgeting what your studio needs for the next, say, 2 years, and if you do that on a month-by-month basis, you'll get a lot more disciplined on, okay, yes, I need to do this, and in that month we have a lot more expense because we're attending Gamescom and we've got a lot more travel. I mean, you get much more disciplined on how much funding do you need and when, and it also sort of like gives investors a lot more confidence that you're carefully and properly planning and organizing. And importantly, if you do it that way, you'll know pretty much exactly how much money you're going to need. So that was mostly about like getting organized and sort of like organizing your financial information. Back to the point about unit economics. And why do we sort of like keep going on about that, and why do we care so much about unit economics? I met companies, tech companies, games companies here, and they said, we're looking for investment, we've got a very cool app, we've got a very cool game, and we made X amount of dollars last year. Sounds great. I mean, you've delivered a product that people want, happy to spend money on. It can support a studio, really good. But that information in itself is just not good enough. As an investor, we would like to understand, well, it's nice that you had sort of like $200,000 revenue last year, but how much did you spend to generate those $200,000? If you don't have that information, you don't know whether your game was actually profitable. And equally, we would like to understand how much of that revenue was generated organically, but just sort of like putting the game out, putting it on Steam, putting it on the App Store, get some organic traffic, or how much was generated with marketing or user acquisition. And it's very, very crucial to understand and know the difference between those two numbers, because if your game is profitable and you're spending quite a lot on marketing, it probably means that your lifetime value exceeds your cost per acquisition by quite a bit, and you have a scalable game. And scalability is really what investors are after. So unit economics in that respect are very, very important. So it's important to figure out, is my game, is my studio going to be profitable? Is it going to be scalable? The other reason why unit economics are so important is investors will compare your investment proposition to probably 100 others. So I would like to understand, well, am I investing into something where sort of like the unit economics are sort of like LTV over cost of acquisition is maybe 200% in this case. Here's another opportunity, it's 120. Here's another one, it's 220, whatever. We are comparing opportunities and we're assessing risk. So if we don't have the unit economics information or estimates, we won't be able to sort of like compare your investment proposition. If we can't compare it, if we can't assess the risk, guess what happens? We'll have to pass. And that's really shooting yourself in the foot. So those unit economics, very, very important, and the same for market research. Because it's really sanity checking whether your game is going to be profitable. It's nice to have the unit economics. Even better to know, well, for this particular game genre, there's actually this number of games coming out every year. They're selling this many copies. So you're tapping into a market which you can sort of like estimate the size of the market. And that's really useful information. So try to get that number, get those numbers. As I said before, it's the type of data that will sort of like give us an understanding whether your game is scalable. We can compare it to others. We can compare it to previous projects. Well, yeah, you may think your numbers are here. These two other games that came out last year, the numbers were either here or here. Maybe your assumptions are off. It's just sort of like doing our diligence, and for that we need data. And also, if you have accurate numbers, you can pretty much sort of like pinpoint how much funding you're going to need and when. So before you sort of like go out and pitch, make sure you're organized and have your sort of the shopping list ready. So what should be on your shopping list? We'd like to see game-related metrics, so retention data, purchase metrics, ARPDAU, ARPUs, RPPUs. Especially for mobile games, we'd like to know lifetime value, try to get some test data, we'd like to see an LTV curve. Is your lifetime value building up sort of like everything sort of like really early on and then it sort of like tapers off really quickly, or is it more stable? For PC console games, estimated sales prices, what are you going to charge in early access, what are you going to charge on release? Also look at competitors and check, did they do lots of bundle deals, because that can really sort of like confuse numbers. And also look at sort of like UA and media related sort of like analytics. Try to get an estimate for cost per install. Have a look at sort of like how things are performing in the store. And market research, we already touched on that. I'm getting a nudge. So it's really all about, we'll get to questions, getting organized, get disciplined on budgeting. And for budgeting, you need to get a grip on unit economics. And if you sort of like pull that all together, you'll first of all, you'll know whether you're sort of like starting something that's scalable and profitable, you can actually explain that to an investor, convince him to invest, and if you can do that, we'd love to have a chat with you. But it's sort of like, make sure you sort of like get to master that. Questions, I would say just ask.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much, Pieter. That's great. We've got a quick question. I think we can probably just round of applause is good. What we'll do, I don't know if we can get a microphone to you. Maybe Pieter, if, oh, there, you bring a microphone over here. Red shirt or burgundy shirt.
Hello. Yeah. You said that what should you have on your shopping list?
Yeah.
So you said LTV. So what is that? What is that refer to LTV?
So with LTV, we mean lifetime value. So I don't know whether you're making mobile games or PC or console games.
Mobile game.
Mobile. So on mobile, if you're doing free to play,
yeah, it's free to play.
So with free to play, obviously it's free to download. You'll be monetizing with ads and with in-app purchases. So if you sort of like have some soft launch data, for example, let's say you've got 10,000 installs. You figure out how much revenue did those installs generate, advertising and in-app purchases. If you divide that by the number of installs you have, that's the amount of revenue that you can sort of like, on average, that you have generated per user. So that's their sort of like lifetime value. And that number will tell you, well, if you could get another 10,000 installs, you probably get that amount multiplied by the LTV of revenue. And that's a very important metric, because if you know how much it will cost in marketing or user acquisition to acquire those users, you can figure out, well, is it profitable to spend the money on marketing? Or if it isn't, then it's not worth spending the marketing budget on.
And LTV itself is an incredibly complicated calculation.
Yep.
It depends on who you ask and how you measure it. And we could probably, we have actually had whole talks just on how to calculate LTV. But Peter's point is, I think really absolutely entirely valid, which is, what is the value of each customer you're bringing in? And how much it costs to get them? And if you don't know those two parts, how are you going to be able to get someone like him to give you money to be able to scale your business? Because he can't work it out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it is let's say, if I have a game, so my lifetime value, it is say forever, or I can change it, say every...
It can change, and that's what developers always try to do. For example, if you've got a game with, lifetime value, as Oscar said, calculating it is, there's different ways to do it, it's fairly complicated. You can go online and find a few tools that will sort of like estimate LTV for you. It's not a static number. If you bring your game out and you see, well, my day 30 retention is a bit low, and you're adding content, you're improving the game, and you see sort of like retention going up, your LTV will also be going up. So it's a function of monetization and retention. So it's not a static number, it's a number you can work on. And that's why sort of like companies do soft launches. Yeah. They'll bring the game out, oh, our LTV is here, well, we want it to be here, well, and we see our retention numbers being a little bit below where they should be. They'll keep improving on the game during soft launch to hit those numbers and then scale when they're ready.